Agriculture Minister McKenzie was at the Drought Summit in Dubbo. She's still there and she's been good enough to join us. Thanks very much for your time today, Minister. We've just heard from the PM there today that talk about this issue of drought likely to become more regular, an acknowledgement of climate change and just one of its impacts on Australia.
Well, I think all of us that live out in regional Australia acknowledge the impact of climate change, and what we need to ensure is that our farmers and our regional communities have the resources and the resilience they need to deal with increasing climate variability. And that's what we've heard today at the Bush Summit, and I just want to say thanks so much to the Daily Telly for actually putting this on. It's been fantastic to be in a room full of people who care about working together to create and sustain a safe and prosperous, sustainable regional Australia. And the ideas that have come out today are really powerful, and I'm really looking forward to working as Agriculture Minister with the stakeholders in the room today and state governments as well to really underpin agriculture's future towards 2030.
So we've got adaptation strategies to whatever climate change might throw at Australia. You've also got minimisation. So were there many there talking about a hope that Australia would help drive lower emissions around the world, perhaps have a more ambitious emissions reduction target?
Well, this isn't a climate summit, this isn't a climate change summit, this is a bush summit. And this is actually about making sure agriculture, as one of the key economic drivers of regional communities, is sustainable into the future with changing international price fluctuations and climate variability. So there was a lot of discussion today around how do we actually get jobs out into the bush, how do we diversify not just our agricultural offerings and commodities on farms, but our regional economies more broadly. How do we deal with the water issue and making sure we use that very precious resource in the very, very best way for optimal outcomes, not just for the environment, but for our communities out here in regional Australia, in the basin, and especially for a productive capacity. I think one of the key things that's come through today, which has been really powerful, is how do we work together to overcome that disconnect between city and country, because it's only really by working together that our national prosperity is upheld, and that is by backing in the productive capacity of regional Australia.
So we've got about 10 towns at the moment in regional New South Wales and Queensland where there's a very real chance of running out of water within a year. Is there anything the federal government can or will do about that?
Well, obviously that's a great concern to us, particularly those of us that live out in the regional communities, and this is a result of the worst drought in many places in this country since records began, and it's taking an enormous toll, not just on the environment but on businesses and increasingly now on towns and communities. And I know state governments, local councils are working very, very hard to ensure that those towns don't run out of water. And that has come up today.
It's up to them at this
I think
stage.
one of the issues, one of the issues that has been raised today is the conversations that we have as a nation. The conversation being had out here in basin communities and in regional farming communities that do grow cotton and rice, that do farm beef and pigs and chickens, is very different often to the conversations being had in capital cities. And it's about bridging that gap so that we actually have a better understanding between those two areas about the real impacts out here, so that we don't see national days of action against farmers, as we saw in April this year from some vegan activists, so that we actually do have an appreciation of young school children who we heard today, the longer they spend in our school system, the less appreciation and understanding they have for farmers. I mean, that is a real concern when you think about the role that agriculture, fishers and foresters have in underpinning our national economy. You've sort of separated out these two issues, and really that's resulting in perverse outcomes in terms of political and legislative outcomes when the predominant voter base is in cities and does not have an appreciation. And that's why what the Daily Telly's done here in bringing people together has been so powerful.
What do you mean by perverse legislative outcomes in that regard because of this divide or disconnect between city and country? What do you mean by those perverse outcomes? What's an example?
Well, when you look at governments that are elected by predominantly city electorates, you end up getting outcomes which are not in favour of food production, of fishing, of forest harvesting. We've seen it in Victoria. And so what's been really fantastic about today is actually highlighting the fact that we need to have more open conversations. We need to be talking up the bush. It's not broken out here. It really has a positive and vibrant future. We want more and more Australians to back what we do out here and to also come and join us on that journey. So when you do end up with a political outcome, and, you know, in various state governments, if you look at my own home state of Victoria, etc., that sometimes those views and perspectives held by city people, because they don't understand what's happening out here, lead to severe impacts out for regional communities and therefore negative impact on productive capacity. So that's why I think what the Daily Telly's been great. What you're doing today is great as well.
Always happy to put a spotlight on these issues. The National Insurance program for farmers is being put on the table by New South Wales Minister. A safeguard is how this is being described against financial impact on farmers. Are you open to that with some federal support?
Well, the New South Wales government have made that announcement. I'll have a look at the detail and I have more to say in coming weeks.
So is that a possibility to be open to look at maybe a national scheme where the states and Commonwealth are both putting in here?
Well, to be honest, I haven't seen the detail. I've been in the summit itself listening to farmers and community groups. So I'll have a look at the detail of the New South Wales proposal. We've got an Ag Ministers meeting in October, so we may be able to consider it at that stage, but as I haven't seen the detail, it would be inappropriate for me to comment at this stage.
In terms of the broad concept of it, though, would it be something you'd need to assess carefully as to who qualifies? When you talk to farmers, a lot of them will say, well, you know, there are people really doing it tough, that's not their fault, but sometimes farming practices means people get in trouble before they should. They don't properly prepare for drought, for example.
Well, that's been one of the issues that's been raised a lot today about looking forward. We know we're going to be experiencing drought again in our country's future, and that we need to take the learnings out of this drought and ensure that we prepare, not just as federal governments through our drought fund, etc., and building those resilience at a Commonwealth level, but that individual farmers and communities actually take the learnings out and prepare better in each and every case for the next drought, because it's not a matter of if, it will be when, and family businesses need to put money away in good times so that they can draw on that when the drought comes again. And that's been a really key theme of today that actually a lot of farmers in particular have raised. Those that have done, you know, have been able to get through the drought, that have still got breeding stock, etc., are the ones that have actually prepared well in the good times. And we as governments, both state and federal, need to give them the tools and the mechanisms to prepare as best as they can.
Yeah, as I said, always interesting to hear what they themselves, farmers, have to say about this. There's a new parliamentary committee that's going to be formed, Minister, to do with regional and rural communities and economies. What can it do that is not being looked into already by you or the department? What's new about this?
Well, I think the Prime Minister made it really clear in his address this morning, you know, there is a lot of great work happening out in regional communities right across the country, and I've been able to see a lot of that in my time in Parliament, and we don't always highlight that. Often the only time regional Australia hits the front page or indeed news programs across the country is when we're doing it tough. And so there's often a negative perception or a romanticised perception of who regional Australia is, who our farmers are and what they do. And so my understanding of what the committee is to do is actually to get out there and look at best practice. We lead the world in how we use water efficiently. A lot of our agri-tech is fantastic. For every $1 we put in, we get $12 out of our research and development money out here in regional communities. And so there are some really great case studies that we can highlight, but also that may also be transferable to other areas in the country, because often what regional Australians do is they're very good at working in their own space, on their own farm in their own business and community, not realising that they've harvested a gem of an idea that actually we could use elsewhere to drive productivity towards a $100 billion industry, and making sure that we keep producing that clean, green food and fibre that the world knows us for.
Future Drought Fund is something that both sides support. So the Scott Morrison idea from last year, it's the funding envelope that's the stoush here. You want it to come out of the Building Australia Fund. Now, this is also earmarked for infrastructure, including water infrastructure. So if you kept that as is, couldn't it be used for dams? Wouldn't that be a good thing?
Well, we've already got a significant amount of money going towards water infrastructure, dams included. We've got $100 billion going into broader infrastructure funds and almost $1 billion into projects specifically into regional community infrastructure through our Building Better Regions and our regional growth funds and the like. So we're really, really comfortable with the amount of investment we're making into regional community infrastructure and the broader road and rail task. We're also very proud of our digital connectivity piece, which is that digital infrastructure that's required to really drive the productivity gains in agriculture and regional communities going forward. Look, Labor likes to talk a big game when they're in opposition about how they care about the regions, how much they want to invest in the regions. But you just need to look at what they do when they actually get their hands on the Treasury benches. They cut regional programs. They cut regional investment into communities like this just here in Dubbo. So Albanese can say what he likes at the Bush Summit. The reality is when he's in government, Labor cuts money to the regions. We have got the money there for regional community infrastructure.
What did they cut in Dubbo last time, Minister?
We've got the money structure, and we understand and believe that by investing in drought funding of this magnitude, we help build that resilience for the next drought. Now, that is about building Australia and building. They cut significant amounts of Building Better Regions funding the last time they were in government when Catherine King was the minister. That affected projects right across regional Australia, including places like Dubbo, right across regional Australia. That program is used to build sporting halls, community events, etc. And Labor, every time they're in government, cut our regional programs. It's fact.
Agriculture Minister Bridget McKenzie, always appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.